All right, I'm so glad to be joined today on Bad Faith Podcast by Billy Michael Honor, who's organizing director of the Action Fund of the New Georgia Project. Welcome to Bad Faith.
I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So part of why I reached out was there has been a lot of chatter, both in the written news media and on shows like MSNBC and CNN, about a growing concern about what Joe Biden faces, particularly with Black voters, particularly with Black male voters, as he faces down 2024. And this conversation seems to have been exacerbated in part because of Cornel West's entry into the race, the perception being that unlike some other potential third-party or Green Party candidates, because he has such name recognition and broad respect within the Black community, that he could pose a real issue for the Democrats as they head into 2024. And in particular, I noticed one commentator in a clip that has been doing the rounds around the left mention New Georgia Project, and that people that she spoke to with the organization were expressing concern that as they were knocking doors and trying to get out the vote the way that they did back in 2020, they're just not getting the same level of enthusiasm that they had hoped.
Joe Biden became the first Democrat to win a presidential election in Georgia since 1992 when he won in 2020. And just to show how crucial Black voters were to that win, by our calculations, if less than 1% of Black voters stayed home or voted for Trump, the outcome of this election could have been very different. And basically something that we heard on the ground from the director of organizer from the New Georgia Project, which is easily pushing the largest voters registration efforts in the state. They've registered about 30,000 people alone this year. He said people are just frankly not running and jumping about another term of President Biden, and they're frankly keeping their options open. And that's something that I heard from voters consistently, is that while they're aware that Joe Biden could be the default, they're still wanting to see who else could potentially get in this race. At least one voter told me they were considering Cornel West. But the majority of people here said, even though they may just be voting for Joe Biden in the end of this, their big concerns right now is the economy. They're still feeling the stress of inflation, and jobs are drying up in the state. Even though we've seen some of this good economic data, we just haven't seen those perceptions seem to catch up yet. And as you mentioned, these unfulfilled promises. Student debt was something that we heard consistently from voters, that they really wanted to see that policy come to fruition. But obviously, after the Supreme Court struck it down, we know Biden is trying again, but they were really disappointed that that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and Georgia is important, of course, on its own, but this seems to be also a microcosm of what's happening across the country. We know that Black Republicans made some inroads with particularly Black men last time around. We know that this president, despite a very impressive track record, suffers from a lack of enthusiasm from a lot of Democratic voters. So talk to us a little bit about how this could be worrisome beyond the borders of Georgia, but in other battleground states.
Absolutely. That's something that someone brought up to us, is like, when there is an enthusiasm gap, you need to pay attention to it. I think this was a problem for Hillary Clinton in 2016. She was not able to galvanize enough Black voters to get behind her. And continuously, Black voters seem to be a litmus test for Democrats in this state. You need to be able to secure and motivate the Black vote in order to win in national elections. And something that people raise a concern about is Biden hasn't been in the state very much. He's been there 3 times since he's taken office. He's been to other swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, a lot more. And there's also concerns about investment. A lot of these groups said that they're not seeing investment until the October before a major election. And Black voters really need to see sincere and continuous engagement in order to feel like their vote matters and they're not just being thought of every 4 years. And then their promises, their priorities are forgotten for the next 4 years.
So could you start by perhaps just giving us a sense of what you know to be true, what you've experienced, what people have been saying as you've started the outreach process?
Yeah, no, I think it's a question that we've been getting a lot over the last several weeks as the election gets closer and closer. And that is exactly, how do our voters, who have become so crucial to the overall electoral process in the country, like how are they feeling about elections, particularly our Black voters who we deal with the most? And the real response that I have in terms of what we see out there is that our voters right now are fairly apathetic. Right. There is an acknowledgement that there is an election happening, but there is not excitement. right? And part of the reason that there is that lack of excitement is, first of all, let's just tell the truth. Here in Georgia, we vote like every 5 minutes, right? Like there are elections all the time over the last several years, which creates a sense in which, yes, there is a lot of electoral education among the electorate, but then it's also like another election, so there's a little of that. And so people will start to get more excited the closer the election comes. So I think that's part of that. So I want to name that. And then there are the candidates themselves, right? And there's just not a lot of excitement on that end because of the fact I think there's Biden's age, right? That is at the top of the things that concern people. But also I think people just wanted different voices, right? Like this is basically a redo of what we did, 3 years and will be 4 years ago. And I think people just in the psychology of how humans are and how voters are, they would have liked to have just had new options and different voices that they could choose from. And so it's hard to sort of get up for the rematch so far.
Well, I want to ask specifically about the enthusiasm gap, even between 2020 and 2024, because I remember immediately after 2020, I was listening to some organizers in Georgia on what I believe was Cornel West's then podcast, explaining that even as they had managed to mobilize people in Georgia, not just to help Biden and Democrats win the state, but to also secure the Senate, that they knew they were reporting at the moment at that time that they weren't going to be able to use the same approach again. Like they had basically exhausted their resources. And part of the reason was the pitch. The pitch at that time was $2,000 checks. It was canceling student debt, in particular, his pledge to cancel all HBCU debt. There was a pitch about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We had just come off of the summer of 2020, and Biden had set a 1-year deadline for himself to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. These were the kinds of promises that were being made, and I don't have to tell you that none of those things came to fruition. Partial checks, but not the $2,000 checks. And to this day, if I go on to the Shade Room or whatever to get my cultural news, and there's a political topic, I see a lot of people in the comments still talking about where's my check and what happened to student debt cancellation. So are you concerned about what the pitch is going to look like this time around?
Of course. I mean, so what I do on a daily basis is I oversee running issue-based campaigns in our state that win actual change for folks, right? So we're talking about how it is we increase the livable wage to at least $20 an hour, right? We're trying to stop the rate in which Black women are dying during and after childbirth, right, in our state. And I could go on and on and on, stop hospital closure. Like these are all campaigns we're actively running day in and day out and inviting Georgians into that change-making process, saying these are the issues you care about. Well, imagine my dilemma, right? As someone who's organizing around issues, like actual issues, in many cases that are not rhetorical to say life and death, like they actually are resulting in loss of lives, right? We're trying to bring people in this process. And then we say, hey, we have these candidates, these presidential candidates as well, who are running, most of which have no track record, right, on the issues that we're organizing around, or they've made promises, right, that have not been fulfilled, particularly when we talk about student loan debt, right, the cancellation of student loan debt. And I know that is, there have been attempts to try to do things from this current administration that have been stopped by Supreme Court and others. Like, I get that. But at the end of the day, it still is a record that says, hey, who's fighting for you on these top levels, and why should you want to be excited about them? And I think that's the thing I hear the most, is that most voters understand the political dynamics that make it difficult to create change on federal level and on presidential level. What they don't understand as much is why there doesn't seem to be more fighting, why there doesn't seem to be more aggressive, going after it and going to the mat over these issues. I think that's what they want to see.
Yeah, Cornel West actually just did this interview on The Breakfast Club, where he made this really interesting point, where he said it's obviously the case that someone like Joe Manchin, who does not represent the overwhelming interests of the Democratic caucus, is able to lobby for and get the things that are important to him. Joe Biden bent the knee on his pipeline, right? Even though environmental issues are crucially important to many Democratic voters, Joe Manchin, despite the unpopularity of it, was able to get his pipeline in order to stop holding up the debt ceiling negotiations and some of the other things that have come down to just a single vote.
It's going to be interesting to see if Senator Joe Manchin runs for president, because they say he's going to run. He might run for president, because I feel like they would still have more smoke for you than they would for him, but they should have more smoke for him because he's a politician. He's in bed with them. You don't owe these people nothing.
That's true, but it makes me freer if I have the courage to use that freedom. Look at Brother Manchin now. Here's somebody who could stop the passage of a voting rights bill. Now, it was black women especially, but black folk who pushed Biden across the finish line. But he can sit down and make a deal with Manchin. Manchin stops voting rights for black people. That's about as basic. You're talking about defending democracy, and you defending democracy against the gangster Trump. But when it comes to voting rights for black people, that's not defending democracy either. Well, no, that's an issue that's important, but that's secondary and tertiary. But when it comes to the debt ceiling, he can sit down and make a deal with Manchin. He got his pipeline. He got his money. You see, the double standard, the level of hypocrisy, that's what upsets me about the Democratic Party. Because the kind of gangster sensibility of the Republicans, we assume that's the case. You know, they've got a long history of white supremacists running things, explicit white supremacists. Democrats act as if they on the cutting edge and listening to Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech every day. Every day. Wake up in the morning. No. When it comes to treating these black folk, but we should say this, though, and this is where the class issue comes in, that when it comes to the black middle class and the black bourgeoisie, see, they do have access to status and position.
Yes, they do.
They really do. And all of us know, and this is the thing that upsets me, that if it were the precious children of the black middle classes who were undergoing mass incarceration in the last 40 years, as opposed to the precious black poor and working class youth, we'd have different kind of policy.
Why is it that someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Markey, some of these left-aligned people in the Senate or the whole of the squad in the House aren't similarly able to hold up the Democratic Party agenda in exchange for some kinds of compromises? And what do you make of that? And does that ever come into a conversation that might be going on internally about what role organizing groups like yourselves, like the New Georgia Project, might play in providing additional leverage to the Democratic Party? In other words, let me say that a different way. If the Democratic Party no longer felt like it could rely on the default support of groups like yours that are so crucial to turning out black voters, do you think that would have an effect in making someone like Joe Biden as attendant to the interests of black voters as he seems to be to the interest of Joe Manchin?
I think it's an interesting question, and I'll answer it this way. I'll say that whether candidates and political parties like the Democratic Party like it or not, right? The deciding factor in states like ours and in states across the South that are increasingly becoming like ours as a result of the reverse Great Migration that's been written about and talked about a lot lately. Whether they like it or not, as a result of that, organizations like ours that are the mobilization entities, that are the political education entities in many ways for a lot of these new voters that have come to these southern states that were once reliably sort of red states and now they're purple states in our case, or becoming increasingly so. Whether these parties like it or not, we are the front lines. Right? We are the ones who are determining these small margin races, right? And if it were not for one simple thing, and that is that the issues that we align around, the issues that we organize our people around, happen to be issues that still, at least rhetorically and in terms of an agenda that's put forth, align with the Democratic Party more so than other parties. If it were not for if it were not for that alone, right? This would be lost. This would be a lost situation. But that's a tenuous proposition.
Right, Billy, it's a tenuous, exactly. It's a tenuous proposition because especially in a moment like this, if it's purely about ideological alignment, well, then the presence of non-Biden candidates to the left of Biden become an issue. So, Bernie Sanders and AOC have gotten a lot of flack for immediately, and some people say prematurely, endorsing Joe Biden when there are people in the race that more closely align with them politically, whether it's someone like Marianne Williamson running on a Bernie-style agenda, or whether it's Cornel West, who has progressive bona fides up the wazoo. So, is that really the case that it's about policy? And if it is there a world where an organization that has gotten so much mainstream media accolades, rightly so, given the role that New Georgia Project played in getting Biden elected and getting Biden in the Senate, would actually no longer endorse Biden and come out and turn out people not expressly for the purpose of voting for Democrats, but also to vote third party or for another non-Biden primary candidate?
Yeah. Well, for us, in terms of the New Georgia Project, I mean, we invite people, and it's just true. We invite people to vote on their issues and find whichever candidates are in alignment with that. And I've said this a lot over the last few weeks with Dr. West's emergence. Someone who, I've studied Dr. West's work for the better part of 25 years, like most people, and have given a lot of commentary about what I think about his campaign. And the truth is, even before this, when it was the 2020 presidential election, all of the presidential candidates who were on the Democratic side came to town, and we hosted conversations with them in our constituency. And we said to all of them, we simply want to provide an opportunity for our voters to hear where you stand on these issues, and then they make those decisions. So we would never endorse a president. We didn't endorse Biden. We simply want to invite as many people to come out and vote on their issues. And if that happens to be for one of these candidates, that's fine. So I actually agree with you. That for organizations like ours, we actually, it really is being negligent to our mission, right? To choose candidates over our issues, right? And we're never going to do that, right? We're going to invite people.
Why do I feel like there's a but coming?
No, there's no but. There's no but.
This is fascinating because the way that let's say there because of the reality of our two-party system,
right?
There is an understanding that when Democrats say get out the vote, when the broad left says get out the vote, they're not meaning, hey, Trumpers, we really want you to vote. Now, Democrats don't go as far as to try to limit the franchise for people who are not ideologically aligned by changing rules to make it more difficult to vote and things like that. But, they know that they see New Georgia Project groups that turn out Black voters, demographic groups that are disproportionately Democratic, all of those things as a kind of soft allyship that they can rely on in moments like these. And I do wonder, I mean, I'm not asking you to disclose things that you're not able to on the inner workings of the organization, but what is your perception of any discomfort or anxiety that members of the Democratic institution might be expressing as a consequence of the curiosity that some Black voters are having about Cornel West in particular? Have you sensed any anxiety on the part of the Democratic Party as they liaise with groups like yours?
No, honestly, I haven't seen that. And part of that is because, let's just be honest about it, a lot of the campaigns and the DCCC sometimes want to actually marginalize the impact of groups like ours, so that it seems as though that the real folks turning out Black folks when the stories are written are, the Democratic infrastructure, right? The Democratic Party infrastructure. And so there's always that tension there of, are we even getting the credit that is due in terms of the work that we do year round? Truth is, people who are on the ground know that, it's groups like ours, Black Voters Matter, the People's Agenda. I could go on and on, who are every day showing up, engaging citizens around this state, around these issues, and the parties generally show up, a few months before there's an election, right? But at the same time, when the story is told, we aren't always getting that credit. So actually, there's not. People may assume that there's more of some coalition between groups that are progressive leaning like ours and working with Black voters and the parties than there actually is, right? I've been here several years. I've never had a meeting with anybody from the Democratic Party, right? Ever, right?
That's so interesting, because that cuts both ways. It also can cut in a kind of, is it responsible of the Democratic Party not to be offering more support or trying to get a sense of what you guys are hearing on the ground to be able to respond from a messaging perspective? No, nothing.
I think they listen, but there's no direct reaching out to us, but I think, listen, there's a lot of hubris and arrogance in the history of American politics in these parties, right? We just got to tell it like it is. And also not a good sense of what actually takes place on the ground. That's why elections get lost so often in many areas of the country, particularly in the South, is because parties underestimate the extent to which you really need to be. Robert, former president of Morehouse, in his book, Crisis in the Village, he called them anchor institutions. So Black families, Black schools, and then, in his case, he called them Black faith institutions. I would also add like fraternities and sororities and Greek organizations, right? Like there are certain anchor institutions that actually move, right? The culture, right? And you could add entertainment now in the last, 25 years, right? And we are those groups. Like our organizations are, a hodgepodge of all of those things. These political parties are not. They are not. They're not unabated. And that's why you get President Harris having the struggles, like as much as she's trying to reach out, right, to these different groups, still not seeing rising numbers. It's like because there's not a real connection there, right, that people fence and feel, right?
What do you make of that? What do you make of that, Billy, with her in particular? You were saying fraternities and sororities, she is an AKA. She did go to an HBCU. She's a bison. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? It's about how it is that you, it's about the history in terms of what you choose to identify with and what you don't choose to identify with. And in her case, I think it's not so much so that she hasn't tried. It's just that she represents, again, what I'm talking about, institutions that are not endemic, So when you talk about, the very traditional Democratic Party, that's not these organizations, right? That's not them. They may show up and ask for their votes, but that's not living and breathing and being connected to the culture of those, right? She can't show up as an individual anymore. She shows up as the vice president.
Yeah. Honestly, when she was an individual, she was never that popular with Black people to begin with. Part of what was so frustrating to me, I was a reporter at the time when she was first announcing, and so much of the coverage treated everything negative that was said about her as though it was motivated by racism and sexism and was coming from presumably men and non-Black people, white people.
Yeah.
But my observation when I would look again at the comment section, since I'm not a professional pollster, to the extent that I could just look at the comment sections of videos and articles about her, what I saw was a lot of homegrown Black frustration with her record as a prosecutor. So it's Black people from California saying she locked us up. Like she's trying to flip this as though she's a progressive prosecutor, but she ran on being less progressive, more conservative, having a higher conviction rate than I think his name was Tom Hanlon, who she initially replaced in San Francisco when she first became a DA there. So, I think it's not just that she is representing the Biden administration, which is tough because of all what Biden represents, but that there seemed to be like a disconnect prior to that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant when I said that institutions that she identified with in the criminal legal apparatus that she served is definitely one of them. And I think our voters who we need to reach to win elections, right, on the progressive end, are very clear about this deal that has been made. Um, and that deal a lot of times has to do with electing candidates who don't really aren't really in complete alignment, right, with our values, but they tend to be the best that we're told we can do, right? And so we're asked to vote for, just the best we can do rather than that truly represents our interests or what we really can be excited about. And we're asked to make that choice all the time, right? And out of our commitment to the political process and not wanting to sit it out and all of those things, we as an organization continue to do our work. The voters continue to show up and do their work. The real question is, how long does this deal that we've seemingly struck, how long does it hold up? And I think with the emergence of different candidates with different voices, I don't know that it's Dr. West this time, but with the emergence of different voices, does that begin to break? That's one of the things I'm watching to see over the next several months as we go into is how many of our voters are saying, nah, I really have to do something different. I really have to stand by what I think is important and not by what is pragmatic. I don't know, but we'll
Well,
see.
you know what Joe Biden had to say about that
Mm,
almost three years ago to the day. It was, I
mhm,
believe, August 6th of
yeah,
2020, where he
mhm,
told Black people
yeah.
that if they were undecided at that juncture,
Then they weren't really Black. Yeah.
they ain't Black. No, don't even try to clean it up for him. He didn't say they're not Black. He got into full Strom Thurmond eulogy mode and said they ain't Black.
Not strong Simon eulogy mode.
You
Tell
know
us
who
how
we're
you really
talking
feel.
about.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden, because
I will.
it's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't Black.
Look, I'm allowed to be open and honest about my political allegiances. They do not align with Joe Biden's. But I think you were sounding incredibly radical to me, Billy. I got to confess, more radical than I expected, because let me just lay my cards on the table.
Sure.
My fantasy
Mm,
is that the Democratic Party's reliance on Black voters to win, the bargain that they struck after realignment, wherein they need this multiracial coalition to come together, but for Black people, they cannot win.
yeah.
Of course, but for a lot of groups, they cannot win. But Black people are the ethnic racial group that votes as a bloc most consistently in the United States.
Mhm.
To use that as a weapon to force our interests, to really try to execute some real leverage. And if I had my druthers, if I could magically, monolithically puppeteer all Black people or get people aboard with my personal agenda, organizations like the New Georgia Project and others who have demonstrated a capacity, an ability, and a willingness to turn out votes that they know will go to the Democratic Party in all likelihood, say they will only do that work if the Democratic Party makes certain concessions, or, says that they will do that work in the service of a candidate other than Joe Biden, who more closely aligns with the interests of the community. But that requires a certain appetite for failure being a Republican nominee.
Yeah.
And many, many people, and I think a lot of Black people, have a real allergy to that possibility, in part because of the constant drumbeat of this is the most important election of our lifetime and Donald Trump is so dangerous, but also partly because historically Black Americans have borne the brunt of the harms that accrue when a conservative is in office because of being disproportionately low income and the things like that. So first in, first out kind of a deal, canary in the coal mine kind of a deal. And so, I mean, as you're thinking about all of this and the role that you're playing here, are those the kinds of thoughts that are also percolating through your mind? You said you're waiting to see how long the deal is going to hold.
Yeah.
I mean, is it just a wait and see, or is it I'm pulling for one side or another, or organizationally, are we having conversations about what role we play in all of this?
No, I love the question. I mean, as an organizer, you have to know that I'm always going to be led by where the people are. Like, I'm not going to take them an agenda. So when I say I'm waiting to see, it's like, I'm going to see where the people are, right? That's what I mean. But look, we created a Dirty South democracy political agenda, January 2022. We talked to thousands of Georgians. We looked at what they wanted. We brought a group of organizers together in a room, and I said, we're going to come up with a political agenda. And I don't give a damn who ends up being the candidate. If they're not in alignment with this agenda, we ain't supporting them. Period.
Well, you know who you sound like. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And so we came up with that agenda, and we went around and we mobilized Black folks all over the state around that agenda. That remains our agenda. It's an 8-point agenda. We are committed to that political agenda. We tell people to vote on that agenda. That's it.
So what kind of items are on the agenda?
The agenda is the cancellation of federal student loan debt. It is raising the minimum wage to $20 an hour at least, right? It is stopping the hospital closures that have been happening all over our state. It is putting in alternative birthing facilities in majority Black places to stop the rate in which Black women are dying during and after childbirth. It is an affordable housing policy that includes rent control. Like, all of these things are part of this agenda and these are things that we heard from people in the community. So to answer your question directly, my dream, what I want to see organizing, is that we build independent political parties, right, around these agendas, right? And that we then, because there's no real way to do what you're asking, right, if we don't actually have people, large scaled groups of people who invested in the process, who can influence the process, right? Because part of the way in which third party candidates and other voices, who are calling for these things have been able to be so easily marginalized is simply on the trope that there is no way that they can win. And whether we like it or not, there are a lot of older Black people, and frankly, Black people in general, who are very persuaded by, I ain't trying to waste my vote, right? And until we can do what happened in 2008 and 12, I love actually talking about it. Now look, Obama didn't carry Black people in Georgia, by the way, in 8 or 12. Biden did, and we hadn't had a Democratic president do that since Clinton in 1992, not even 96 Clinton, so by the way. But when Obama ran, what did happen is you did then see a shift of people who actually, in an internal way, shifted from the pragmatic, the Clintons are the ones who can win, to this other like, oh, wait a minute, right? We can actually vote for this person because they got a shot, right? In the yes we can, Iowa victory did it, right? And I think that is actually a good case study for if you can begin to build some real political synergy, right? And real scaled, movement around a particular agenda, and people believe, this has a chance, then we can do it, right? But it can't be marginal.
That's such an interesting point, because some people have argued that Cornel West should be running within the Democratic Party for a whole host of reasons. But one reason that I think, I don't personally agree with that, but one reason that I think I do find to be the most convincing is that because Joe Biden is not participating in the first primary contest, because the Democratic Party chose to rewrite the primary schedule so that South Carolina goes first, but states actually set their own primary dates so that Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. are making a lot of the New Hampshire contest in particular, because they know Joe Biden not participating, it means one of them is going to win. And so you're going to have a news cycle about a non-Joe Biden candidate winning a state. And I think the hope is that, in much the same way that Obama demonstrating he could get white voters in Iowa to support him lent gave Black voters the confidence to actually believe in him and vote for him going forward, that something similar could happen for a progressive candidate. And Cornel West won't be able to obviously compete in that because he'll be a general election candidate as a third party candidate. Yeah. That being said, do you believe that there is a path for convincing Black voters with all of the skepticism, I think rightly that we often have, that someone like Cornel West should be taken seriously? Or maybe we're already there?
So on the Cornel West piece, I mean, I love Dr. West. I really do. I've said it. I'm on the record. I think I got a lot of, I've heard from a lot of my Black academic friends when I said that there's W.B. Du Bois and then there's Cornel West in the last 130 years of Black intellectual life. I stand by that. I think Dr. West should have ran 20 years ago. When I heard him having a conversation with Charlie Rose about supporting Bill Bradley back there in 2000. And I was thinking that's what we needed you to run. Just on the pragmatics of it right now, I mean, I think, unfortunately, there are things, no matter what he says rhetorically, that will just hurt him. Our superficial American political culture probably won't allow it.
Why not? So go ahead and say the things.
He's too old, and then these people on the Obama, it drives me crazy every time, but it literally gets said probably 5 out of 10 times if you bring up Cornel West. He's still mad about those Obama inauguration tickets, which is the stupidest thing ever. It's the stupidest thing ever if you followed it. But it's part of public discourse. So that's what people think about it. And that's why I wrote the piece for the Huffington Post several years ago about the Cornel West we forgot when we met Obama. It was like, listen, this is the same way he talked about Obama is the same way he talked about so many other, political candidates for 25 years, but y'all liked it before it was somebody that y'all liked, right? I mean, this is the man who said that Clarence Thomas is beautifully Black in phenotype, but terribly white in ontology. Okay, I mean,
and I love a good Dr. West drag.
And Black people were like, yes, that's right, Dr. West. You see what I'm saying? And so it's like this is talking, and we did. So unfortunately, I think there's too much. It's just too much that have happened. But I love that he's in the race. I love that he's in the race. Yeah.
What do you love about him being in the race then? What do you think is the game? Because one thing I really liked was Shama Sawant, Seattle City Council member. At one point earlier this year, she was on Bad Faith podcast, or maybe this happened when we were at a workers' strike back event. But she was talking about what can be gained, what you can earn, what can be won outside of the literal victory from a campaign. And others like Nick over at RBN have talked about how their experience working on the Bernie 2016 campaign radicalized them, even if they would no longer support Bernie. They don't like how he's been behaving post 2016 or post 2020, that they learned something. They don't regret that experience. And so when you say you're glad Cornel West is in the race, for what purpose?
Oh, it was clear to me when he released his announcement of his campaign and he went down the alignment of the issues. One by one, I was like, oh, that's our agenda. That one is almost the entire Dirty South democracy agenda we've been pushing down here. Almost told us. I was like, just being fair about it. It's a candidate that's almost completely in alignment with the things that we care about and that we're organizing around, right? I mean, that's just the truth of it. If people don't like it, then, whatever. I love that someone is saying these things and has a platform to put these issues out there and to hopefully, the win that's not the electoral win, to pull the party, right? To pull whoever it is that does get the nomination and all of that, pull them into a conversation around these issues. And, I do agree with you about there's a case to be made about if he had run Democratic, because, Al Sharpton had a similar campaign in 2004, right? Where, he's like, I ain't thinking about doing no winning. Like, I'm just trying to get up there and talk about the things that nobody wants to talk about, which a 2004 Al Sharpton really amounted to just voting rights and more voting rights and, stop police brutality, but we'll take it, right? And Cornel West has obviously a much more robust agenda, and they're just things that aren't being talked about, particularly around like in poor people, right? Like and how I even look we used to at least try in these presidential campaigns to at least give lip service to what we're going to do about impoverished people. Now we don't talk about them at all. Like they have disappeared, right? It reminds me of like when I remember in 2008, the big debate topic was around if there was going to be a pathway to citizenship and the ways in which we could have, immigration policy. And we were talking about domestic worker programs. And I mean, it was a fierce, like robust debate. Imagine how far we have come in our political discourse. Now we are literally at build a wall. Like we're at the most base level, stupid type response.
Build a wall. They're putting chainsaws in the Rio Grande.
Yes, that's right. And so when our political discourse has been so like watered down, is too small, right? Like in such a short period of time, like it has been dumbed down. And I want to use those words. It has been dumbed down so much that a candidate like Cornel West is important because it raises the discourse, right?
I think that's right, Billy. But what's also going on with the rest of Black leadership? You guys have got a Black senator down there. There are Black mayors all over the country that tend to be pretty conservative. Lots of these mayors have gone through Bloomberg's mayor camp that may or may not have influenced certain political choices.
Yeah.
You have Cop City going on in a way that doesn't seem to have gotten very much support from Black leadership in Atlanta, or the opposition to Cop City doesn't seem to have gotten very much support. Warnock did eventually come out and make a vaguely supportive statement after I think the Tatuega was murdered, but no one really thought that was exactly a ringing endorsement. I mean, are people talking about that particular issue as doors are being knocked and outreach is happening?
Yeah. So our organization is actively seeking to get people to sign in the city of Atlanta to support the referendum, to have it on the ballot so that citizens of Atlanta can decide whether they want the Atlanta police training facility. And so we're engaged in that on the premise that, we believe in democratic values, like the people should decide, especially for something like this. So I want to say that we're actively engaged and on the side of people making that decision, not the political class. That being said, to broaden it, though, to your question of what people are saying on the doors, I mean, people care deeply about economics. You know how this works, right? Like when you knock in the doors, people are thinking about the hardcore issues of, is their life, better? How could it be made better if different political decisions were being made, right? And the challenge, I think, for Senators Ossoff and Warnock, and Senator Warnock used to be the chair of the New Georgia Project Board. He hired me here way back when. I've run a bunch of things for Senator Warnock. I love him to death. But one of the things I've always said is, you once were an activist and a pastor, which gave you the sort of moral freedom to speak in a particular way and be in a particular way and show up in a particular way. And now the restraints of the office are clearly evident, right? But I don't ever doubt that in his core, I know what he's about and I know what he's going to fight for. And I know what side of history he wants to be on. It's just a question of now how we as the electorate in this state push our senators, right, to be the type of senators that we need them to be, right? Because unfortunately, I don't know that it'll happen without us pushing, right? Without that accountability being forced upon them. Otherwise, the restraints and the system itself is probably too strong.
I mean, you have to know, Billy, that there are people who are even open to the idea of pushing Biden left. Okay, we're going to hold our nose. We're going to push. We're going to have to. But over the last 2 or 3 years, they have become disillusioned that there's any leverage that they have or anything that Biden will listen to. Like, again, the Cornel West example from the Breakfast Club interview, Manchin seems to understand leverage and be able to get it. The Freedom Caucus seems to be able to get leverage out of their caucus on the right. But that there is either an unwillingness to do so or some kind of structural barrier to the left left members of the Democratic Party to being able to achieve those same kinds of things. And so at this point, people are saying, well, maybe I want to check out altogether. Maybe I want to leverage my vote by saying I am willing to allow Trump to win if it means the Democratic Party would rather have that happen than to listen to me advocate for basic bedrock anti-poverty agenda items like a $20 minimum wage and student debt cancellation and free health care. And there, I think there was the structural question, which is, I mean, right now there's an ongoing debate. Like literally before I logged in, I was watching Justice Democrats, the organization that helped to elect AOC and some of these squad members, with the idea of being adversarial to the Democratic Party and fighting for left change, have these financial woes because they can't raise money anymore from the base. At the same time that they're fending off these campaigns that are funded by AIPAC and DMFI, these Israel-aligned PACs, who are antagonistic to those leftists because of their support of Palestinian rights, BDS, and all of these kinds of things. And I was rereading Ryan Graham at The Intercept's amazing article / podcast, which people should listen to or read, that details Maxwell Frost, Afro-Latino, youngest.
From the district, my home district. Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida.
Okay, all right. Well, like many of us were thrilled for him, excited for him. Yeah. But he was someone who very stridently advocated for Palestine, was a BDS supporter. And as Ryan Graham details in this piece, has backed off of that because there is this acknowledgement that you cannot operate within the Democratic Party and make an enemy of those lobbying groups that are very well funded. There was an article in the Intelligencer in New York Mag earlier this week as well, in which Mondaire Jones, someone I know personally and liked from law school, making a hard pivot on the same issue, jockeying for the support or at least not being attacked by the Israel lobby in New York State. Jamal Bowman has had his run-ins going back and forth on these kinds of issues. And there is this article about how Hakeem Jeffries, who has said that Israel is the 6th borough of New York and is, I think, either there now or just got back from there, not saying a word about AIPAC targeting Black leadership in particular for primarying, because of the pro-Palestinian sentiment of so many Black leaders. And so it's really drawing into question, what is the purpose of Black leadership, of having a Black leader of the House, of having a congressional Black caucus, if it's not going to stand up for its own members? And if the Democratic Party isn't going to stand up for its own congressional members, what are the chances that any of us here on the ground have any leverage with this exact same party?
Yeah, well, I think here's the thing. All of these folks are in power because somebody had to show up and vote for them, right? And the leverage is, do you want to be disempowered, right, by an electorate choosing not to show up, right? Now, that may be an after-the-fact leverage, right? But it may be, in fact, where we are, right? In the sense that, let's just play this out. Neither one of our senators here in Georgia have to run next year. Ossoff doesn't have to run, and neither does Warnock, right? But they will be watching, right? And if there is a dramatic decrease in voter turnout, which is being predicted by many grassroots activists who I work with and who've worked with for a long time, who says next year is going to be a rude awakening, right, for these Democratic parties, right? If that happens, that will be the leverage, because that means it is going to be time for them to run in these subsequent years, and they will not be able to win, right, if that persists to be the case, right? And so there's a way in which, right, there's a correction that's possible, right? There is a leverage and a pressure that's possible, right? Now, I always say, though, I get nervous, though, when we simply talk about this in terms of elections and parties, because the truth is people will say whatever, right? Like they'll say whatever to get elected, right? And then we don't get the things once they get elected. We're right back in this situation again. We're right back in this
Biden 2020.
Right, we're right back in this situation again. So for me, my project is very different than this, right? And I know that people don't believe this, but we are an independent political organization, and we pride ourselves on being independent. We are trying to build power for Black and brown folks. The candidates are very, very second and thirdary to this, because what we do is we create conditions where Stacey Abrams started the New Georgia Project as a state house person who was looking at the conditions and saw that we had Black people moving to this state who were coming here for economics, not to get politically engaged. And if we could just get even a marginal number of those folks engaged in the political process, that we could create a new Georgia. That is what that was the idea. It wasn't based upon getting anybody elected. It was based upon what was possible, right? By actual people building power for themselves in this state and making their own decision, right? That's what I want to see, because that long term is what's going to get us where we need to get. If we control and demand 2 or 3 million Black people in this state will vote around an agenda, then that's what'll make politicians to listen. But as long as it's just around an election cycle and winning elections, we're not going to get there.
Well, Billy, what you just said it's kind of a fascinating, I won't say admission, but it's a fascinating position for someone who works for a turnout organization to kind of say, which is that the organization has progressive ideals, but if people do turn out, it will be seen as a mandate for a candidate that does not have progressive ideals. So there is this way, it's a weird admission. I feel this very strongly too. And I know how this is going to sound to some people and probably be taken out of context, but there is a way that I have a fear that simply concern about abortion access, which has motivated so many voters to turn out, and hatred of Donald Trump will enable Biden to win Georgia and many other states and win the presidency, and will be seen as a referendum on moderate, I would call them conservative Democratic policies, and that it will set the interests of the left and poor and working people and Black people and brown people in this country back significantly if Biden wins.
But can I give
yeah, go ahead.
Can I give a longer view? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I give a longer view of that?
Yeah.
In the immediate, that's the way it may seem. But you gotta remember, this is a long-term process, right? This is a long-term process of how you build out a actual independent political base, right, over a certain segment of time. And so, yes, next year, probably too soon. The dynamics you're talking about may be the case. But we're talking about if you're able to build people into this process so that you can, over the course of time, start demanding that power, right? So that we shift the narrative from simply being about who's the candidate to what is the agenda, right? That takes time. And what we believe when we talk about this new South agenda, we're talking to other organizations around the South about how we can come together, how we can do this together. Because what we believe is that through persistence of building out this coalition, things can change over time. And we're seeing it happen, but we just need more time. Because I'm with
Billy,
you.
But what happens with more time? It seems like, look, New Georgia, you guys, the Georgia voting groups, Black, Georgia Voter Matters, all of these groups have done good work. They have demonstrated, you have demonstrated your capacity to get turnout. It's you. So to the extent that there's a threat, there's like the leverage that exists, it seems to me that you've done that work. And that time doesn't get you anything else. The moment is, you could conceivably, if it were a more explicitly political organization, let's say, an organization that was willing to perhaps step away from the stated agenda of simply turning people out into a different kind of agenda of advancing a candidate that aligned with policies, but, as seen through a particular candidate, assuming there is one in a given race, say, we are not going to do this work this time unless we are in fact going to actively tell people to stay home or to vote for a third party candidate if X, Y, and Z. And I guess I'm not getting, I think you could do that now. You would take obviously all the slings and arrows from doing that, but what do you get? How do you get closer to being able to use your skills as leverage, your turnout capacity as leverage 10, 15 years from now instead of in 2024?
No, I hear you. in our theory of change, though, I don't know that it bears out that encouraging people to withhold their vote or sit out of the political process actually builds long term. Actually, the oppose happens, which is people they hear you, they believe you, and then they say, yeah, okay, you're right, and they check out, right? And so at least for us, we have to keep people in the gym, right?
And the third party isn't a gym.
Well, the third party could be that. That's different. Third party, I mean, that's the conversation. I mean, it just hasn't been a compelling one, in recent time.
Well, enter Dr. West, right?
Yeah, I hear. We've talked about this. I mean, I think that we'll see what happens over these months. But yeah, I don't believe that as of yet there is enough consensus around any candidate, not Biden, right, that would demand for us to say we're going to withhold votes to vote for this person, right? Like that's for us, we have to have people get involved because there's still too many people who are not, right? And to all of a sudden tell people, well, don't get involved in it because this particular candidate we don't like that is not our theory of how these things work.
No, I agree. I think that you should be involved. I just think maybe you should be involved for the people that I like. But I'll stop beating that drum. Before we wrap, I just wanted to ask you a quick question because you did bring up Stacey Abrams having founded New Georgia Project. And obviously, her project of the last couple of years has been pursuing all of these voter fraud cases in Georgia, none of which bore results for her side, right? Like there weren't these findings of significant voter suppression. And of course, courts are what they are. Southern courts are what they are. There could be bias. I'm sure everybody has thoughts and feelings about why the courts came out the way that they did. But there was a real tone after 2016 that the reason that Trump was able to be successful was because of voter fraud. Now, certainly, there has been a ton of gerrymandering. Certainly, there have been, efforts to tell people the votes are on the wrong day. And things like that absolutely happen. But it doesn't seem like it materially affected the outcome of 2016. And it's an interesting conversation to be having now that Democrats are so frustrated with Trump's own version of election denialism, which I should point out is more than just election denialism. It's the choice to call up Raffensperger in Georgia and people in these other states across the country and try to get them to submit a fake slate of electors in an act that was fraudulent. It was actual active election interference, not just kind of allegations of voter fraud. That being said, how is the New Georgia Project moving forward in its agenda? How is it understanding the barriers to entry for Black voters in the state if the courts at least seem to have not validated that voter suppression, as we understand it historically, was a significant factor in 2016?
What a lot of courts have said is that they cannot determine that the tactics that are being put forth as voter suppression tactics were illegal or not according to the law. And this is the distinction I make that a lot of people don't make, and that is that voter suppression tactics can be legal by the books, right? And when you have a voter administration infrastructure run and by a particular political party, and they get to make the decisions around that, they're in power. And so they get to make those decisions. Doesn't mean that the decisions they make were not intended, right, to suppress the vote. And I think that's the nuance here. You're looking at someone, I'm pretty sure that nobody's probably mobilized more people of faith to show up to the polls and do faith-based voter protection and pass out water at the polls in the last 10 years. You can't do that anymore. Work that I did and turned out thousands of people of faith to do, you cannot do anymore.
Wait, why is that?
It's a misdemeanor by the law to give water or to hand out anything to anybody at the polls because the other side was convinced that our mobilizations were helping in turning out people to the polls, right? Now, maybe nothing illegal about that because they did it legally. They passed the law, They passed a law that said it wasn't allowed anymore. But it was intended for voter suppression purposes. So I have to say that. And the thing that we're doing to combat that is very simple. And that is we're doing the things that we've always done. And that is grassroots community organizing year round, educating people about the things they need to know, informing them about the ways in which they can make sure that their votes are counted and that they have all of their proper documentation. So it's making us have to use more resources and more money to make sure that people are educated about elections. Yes, it is doing that. But at the same time, it's not stopping anything, right? Like it is, we are continuing to do the work because people persist and they show up, as we've seen by the numbers, that even after SB 202, people have continued to show up to the polls, but not because of the changes as some of the Republicans, but in spite of them, because people want to be defiant of it and say, no matter what you do, we still going to show up and we're going to vote. That is definitely the spirit of things around here. And it will continue to be.
All right. Well, look, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, Billy. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. It's nice to know there are some people still focusing on poverty and kind of these bedrock issues that used to be the bedrock issues that the Democratic Party cared about at one point or another. They were willing to be someone openly critical of the ways in which the party that is perhaps most aligned with us hasn't been so essentially aligned with us of late. So it's been really refreshing. Thank you for joining me, Billy.
Thanks for having me.
Can you let the audience know where they can find you and your organization on the internet and beyond?
For sure. Yeah, you can find us at thenewgeorgiaproject.org or you can find us at ngpaf.org. Yeah, and on social media. All right.
Terrific. Thanks again, Billy. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. You know that you can get another episode of Bad Faith Podcast every week by subscribing at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. For a Monday episode. And of course, you can enjoy free episodes every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts. Take care and keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.